Long before the world would remember him as Saint John Bosco, there was only a poor boy growing up among the rolling hills of northern Italy, a child whose life seemed destined for hardship. Born on August 16, 1815, in the small village of Becci, near Castelnuovo d'Asti, John lost his father before he was even 2 years old. Raised by his deeply faithful mother, Margaret Occhiena, he learned from an early age that faith was not merely something spoken inside a church. It was something lived through sacrifice, perseverance, and unwavering trust in God. No one could have imagined that this humble child would one day become one of the most beloved saints in the history of the Catholic Church. Yet the path that led him there would be marked not only by extraordinary acts of charity, but also by terrifying encounters with forces that seemed determined to stop his mission. By the middle of the 19th century, the city of Turin had become a place of stark contrasts. While factories multiplied and industry flourished, thousands of children wandered the streets alone. Many had lost their parents. Others had fled abusive homes or crushing poverty. They slept beneath bridges, stole scraps of food simply to survive, and were often recruited by violent gangs before reaching adulthood. To most people, these children were little more than a public nuisance. To John Bosco, they were souls worth saving. He opened his doors to anyone who had nowhere else to go. His oratory became a refuge filled with laughter, prayer, education, music, and honest work. Boys who had once expected to die in the streets suddenly found hope, friendship, and purpose. But every life he transformed came at a price. His work challenged powerful interests. Criminal organizations lost the young recruits they depended upon. Employers who exploited child labor resented the priest who taught boys to demand dignity. Certain anti-clerical groups despised the growing influence of the Catholic faith among the poor. Rumors spread quickly throughout Turin. Some mocked him as a dreamer. Others called him dangerous. A few decided he should die. The threats began as anonymous letters slipped beneath doors or left on his desk. Some promised that his orphanage would burn. Others warned him that he would not live to see another year. Friends begged him to travel with companions. Supporters insisted he hire armed guards. John Bosco calmly refused. "If God has work for me," he reportedly said on more than one occasion, "no one can prevent it." Those words would soon be tested. Late one cold evening, after visiting a sick parishioner, Bosco began walking back through one of Turin's narrow streets. Gas lamps cast weak circles of yellow light upon the damp cobblestones, while thick fog swallowed everything beyond a few yards. The city had fallen strangely silent. His footsteps echoed between the old stone building. Without warning, shadowy figures emerged from the darkness. Several men blocked the road ahead. Another appeared behind him. One reached beneath his coat. Whether carrying a knife, a club, or a concealed firearm, his intentions were unmistakable. Witnesses later recalled hearing shouting, then growls unlike anything they had ever heard. From nowhere, a massive gray dog burst into the street. Its fur was thick and rough, its body unusually large, and its eyes shone with fierce determination. The attackers froze. The animal lunged with astonishing speed. It bared enormous teeth and drove itself directly at the men surrounding Bosco. One stumbled backward, another dropped his weapon. A third fled before the dog even reached him. Within moments, every attacker had disappeared into the night. The enormous dog turned toward Bosco. Instead of behaving like a wild beast, it calmly approached the priest. It stood quietly beside him. Bosco gently rested a hand upon its head. Without barking, without demanding food, without showing any sign of aggression toward him, the mysterious animal escorted the priest all the way home. Only after Bosco reached safety did the dog quietly vanish into the darkness. No one saw where it went. This was not an isolated event. Over the following years, the strange animal appeared again and again. Bosco eventually gave it a simple name, Grigio, the Gray One. The mystery surrounding Grigio only deepened with every encounter. No one knew where the dog lived. No one claimed ownership. Despite appearing throughout the city over many years, no one ever reported feeding it. Stable workers never saw it searching for scraps. Market vendors never chased it away. It seemed to exist beyond ordinary needs. Sometimes Grigio appeared during dangerous journeys through deserted roads. At other times, he materialized beside Bosco in the countryside without any warning. There were occasions when companions traveling with Bosco suddenly noticed the great gray animal silently walking beside them, even though moments earlier, the road had been completely empty. Equally astonishing were the stories describing Grigio's disappearance. Instead of running away like an ordinary dog, witnesses claimed he simply seemed to dissolve into darkness. Some insisted he walked behind a tree and never emerged. Others swore he vanished the instant no one looked directly at him. Several accounts even suggested that locked gates and closed fences offered no obstacle whatsoever. The animal would somehow appear inside enclosed courtyards where no entrance had been opened. Such stories spread rapidly among the boys of the oratory. Some believed Grigio was merely an exceptionally intelligent stray. Others whispered that the animal had been sent by Providence itself. Still others wondered whether heaven had assigned an angel to guard the priest, hidden beneath the appearance of a faithful dog. John Bosco himself never encouraged wild speculation. Whenever questioned, he simply expressed gratitude for the protection he had received. He seemed less interested in explaining the mystery than in continuing the work God had entrusted to him. Yet the danger refused to disappear. On another occasion, Bosco accepted an invitation to visit someone outside the city. As evening approached, he prepared to return alone. Friends warned him that suspicious men had been seen watching the roads. Again, he smiled gently and continued on his way. The road stretched through lonely fields, where the fading sunlight gave way to darkness. Suddenly, several figures rushed from behind bushes. The attack was swift. Before the men could surround him, Grigio appeared once more. This time, the dog did not simply threaten. It launched itself directly toward the attackers with overwhelming force. Its furious growls echoed across the empty countryside. The men scattered in panic, abandoning their assault almost instantly. One reportedly cried out that the beast was unnatural. Another refused ever to approach Bosco again. The priest remained unharmed. As before, Grigio calmly accompanied him until he reached safety. Then the great gray guardian disappeared without leaving the slightest trace behind. Years passed. The orphanage expanded. More boys arrived. More lives changed. And still, whenever death seemed only moments away, the mysterious protector returned. Not every attempt against Bosco's life involved hidden ambushes. Some enemies preferred a more direct method. One afternoon, while Bosco was teaching a large group of boys inside the oratory, the atmosphere was peaceful. The students listened attentively as their beloved priest spoke with his characteristic warmth and enthusiasm. Outside, however, someone waited. Hidden from view, an assailant carefully aimed a firearm toward the building. The trigger was pulled. The explosion shattered the quiet afternoon. Glass burst inward as the bullet raced toward Bosco's chest. The boys screamed. Several threw themselves to the floor. For a fraction of a second, it seemed impossible that anyone standing before the window could survive. The projectile struck Bosco's clothing. His black cassock tore violently. Yet instead of piercing his body, the bullet somehow lost its deadly force. It fell harmlessly to the ground, bent, deformed, its energy completely spent. Bosco instinctively touched his chest. There was no wound, no blood, not even a scratch. The stunned silence that followed was unlike anything the boys had ever experienced. Many stared at the damaged bullet lying on the floor. Others looked at the torn fabric of the priest's cassock. Some began to weep. Others dropped to their knees in prayer. The failed assassination quickly became one of the most talked about incidents in Turin. Supporters considered it nothing less than divine intervention. Skeptics searched desperately for natural explanations, but struggled to account for how a bullet powerful enough to rip through heavy cloth had failed to penetrate the body standing immediately behind it. For Bosco, however, the miracle carried a deeper meaning. His life, he believed, had been preserved not because he was extraordinary, but because his mission was unfinished. There were still abandoned children waiting to be welcomed, still broken hearts waiting to be healed, still countless souls searching for hope amid despair. And somewhere, beyond the fearful whispers of the city and the growing number of enemies watching his every move, the unseen battle surrounding the humble priest had only just begun. Had you ever heard of St. John Bosco before today? Have you or anyone you know ever received a blessing, a miracle, or the intercession of St. John Bosco? Write it down in the comments below. I read every single one of your comments, and I'll leave a heart on yours. If this story warms your heart, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends and family so they can strengthen their faith too. The saints were forgotten once, and together, we will never let that happen again. The physical battle against the shadows and the journey into hell. As the years passed, the oratory of St. Francis of Sales grew into far more than a shelter for abandoned boys. It became a living community where prayer echoed through the halls, workshops taught valuable trades, and laughter replaced the despair that had once consumed so many young lives. Every child who crossed its gates found not only food and education, but also the affection of a spiritual father who believed that no soul was beyond redemption. Yet while the daylight hours were filled with hope, the nights often belonged to something far darker. Those who lived closest to John Bosco began noticing strange disturbances after sunset. Long after the boys had fallen asleep and silence settled over the oratory, unexplained noises sometimes echoed through the old building. Heavy footsteps seemed to cross empty corridors. Loud crashes came from locked rooms where no one had entered. Doors rattled violently without any wind to move them. The priests who shared the residence occasionally woke in alarm, believing thieves had broken inside. But whenever they investigated, they found nothing. No broken windows, no intruders, no sign that anyone had been there. Only an unsettling silence lingered in the darkness. John Bosco rarely spoke publicly about these experiences. He feared that dramatic stories could distract people from the gospel and draw unnecessary attention to himself. Nevertheless, those who knew him personally later recorded many of the extraordinary events that unfolded behind the closed doors of his small bedroom. It was there, during the deepest hours of the night, that the priest claimed to face terrifying spiritual assaults, unlike anything he experienced during the day. Several witnesses recalled mornings when Bosco appeared unusually exhausted. His face looked pale, his hands trembled slightly, and dark circles surrounded his eyes. Despite his fatigue, he never complained openly. Only when questioned by trusted companions did fragments of the mysterious struggle emerge. He described awakening suddenly to violent noises that seemed to explode from every corner of his room. Walls shook as though struck by invisible hammers. Furniture scraped across the floor without anyone touching it. Books fell from shelves for no apparent reason. The atmosphere itself seemed heavy, as though the air had become almost impossible to breathe. On certain nights, the disturbances became physical. Bosco reported feeling an overwhelming force seize him while he slept. Without warning, he was thrown from his bed onto the cold stone floor. The impact left bruises across his body. At other times, he struggled to rise because an invisible weight pressed down upon his chest with crushing intensity. He later explained that the pressure was so severe He could scarcely draw a single breath. It felt, in his words, as though unseen hands were attempting to suffocate him. He reached instinctively for his crucifix. He whispered prayers through gasping breaths. Slowly, the unbearable weight lifted. When fellow priests entered his room the following morning, they often found chairs overturned, blankets scattered across the floor, and signs of violent disorder that could not easily be explained. Some assumed exhaustion had caused restless sleep. Others believed the priest had accidentally fallen. But those who witnessed the repeated pattern began wondering whether they were observing something beyond ordinary human experience. The attacks did not end there. According to accounts preserved by members of the Salesian community, one of the strangest incidents involved Bosco's manuscripts and personal Bible. These writings represented years of work. Within their pages were educational plans, spiritual reflections, letters, sermons, and notes intended to guide future generations of priests and teachers. One evening, everything appeared perfectly normal. The room had been carefully arranged before Bosco retired for the night. When morning arrived, however, an astonishing scene awaited him. His Bible and handwritten papers were covered by a strange black residue unlike ordinary soot. The pages carried an overpowering odor, described by witnesses as sulfur, mixed with burning smoke. Some sheets had become stained beyond repair. Others seemed partially scorched, despite the complete absence of fire. Even more unsettling was the smell itself. The foul odor did not disappear after opening windows. It lingered inside the room for days. Several priests reportedly entered the chamber and immediately noticed the same suffocating scent. No candle had fallen. No fireplace malfunctioned. No practical explanation fully accounted for the phenomenon. Bosco interpreted the event as another attempt to discourage the mission God had entrusted to him. His response was remarkably calm. Rather than surrender to fear, he gathered the damaged papers, thanked God for preserving what remained, and quietly began rewriting the ruined material from memory. Those around him were astonished. He seemed to possess an extraordinary serenity, even while facing experiences that would have shattered the courage of many others. Yet among all the extraordinary events associated with John Bosco, none would become more famous than the prophetic dreams that accompanied his ministry. From childhood onward, Bosco frequently experienced vivid dreams that he believed carried profound spiritual meaning. Many involved symbolic images that later appeared to unfold in real life. Others offered guidance for difficult decisions concerning the oratory. Some warned of future dangers affecting the church or society, but one vision surpassed them all in both intensity and terrifying realism. It was the journey he later described as a visit to hell. According to Bosco's own account, the experience began like many of his prophetic dreams. A radiant guide appeared beside him. Filled with both authority and compassion, the mysterious figure invited him to follow without fear. Together, they traveled beyond familiar landscapes until they reached a broad road crowded with countless travelers. At first, everything appeared almost joyful. People walked confidently, laughing and speaking among themselves. The path seemed pleasant and inviting. There was little to suggest any immediate danger. Bosco soon recognized many of the faces. To his horror, several were young people, much like the boys entrusted to his own care. Some had once attended his oratory. Others resembled countless adolescents he encountered throughout Turin. They moved forward carelessly, unaware of where the road was leading. The heavenly guide remained silent. As they continued walking, the cheerful atmosphere slowly changed. The air became unnaturally hot. The sky darkened. A distant roar echoed across the landscape. Without warning, the pleasant road ended at the edge of an immense abyss. Beyond it stretched a terrifying realm consumed by flames. Columns of fire rose into endless darkness. The ground itself appeared alive with unbearable heat. The cries of suffering filled the air with unimaginable anguish. Bosco watched in horror as the unsuspecting travelers continued forward. Only when they reached the very edge did they realize the danger before them. By then, it was too late. One after another, they disappeared into the infernal chasm. The guide explained that many souls travel comfortably through life without recognizing the consequences of persistent sin until the final moment arrives. Bosco stood frozen. Every instinct urged him to turn away. Instead, the guide instructed him to approach one of the immense walls surrounding the abyss. Reluctantly, he obeyed. "Touch it," the guide commanded. Bosco hesitated. The heat radiating from the surface already seemed unbearable. Still, he stretched out his hand. The instant his fingers touched the stone, an indescribable pain shot through his entire body. It felt as though molten metal had burned through flesh and bone. He cried out in agony. The pain became so overwhelming that he awoke instantly. His room was dark. His heart pounded violently. His breathing came in desperate gasps. For several moments he remained unable to distinguish dream from reality. Then he noticed something astonishing. His hand still hurt. The burning sensation had not disappeared upon waking. According to later testimonies, Bosco claimed the injury remained visible for quite some time afterward, serving as a physical reminder of what he had experienced during the vision. Even stranger were the reports from other priests living nearby. When they entered his room later that morning, several remarked upon a powerful smell resembling burned material and sulfur lingering in the air. They searched for its source. No fire had broken out. No candle had overturned. Nothing inside the room appeared capable of producing such an odor, yet the smell remained. For days, visitors reportedly noticed the same disturbing scent. Bosco never described the vision as a spectacle meant to inspire curiosity. Whenever he spoke about it, his voice reportedly carried profound sorrow, rather than sensational excitement. What haunted him most was not the fire itself. It was recognizing familiar young faces among those walking so confidently toward destruction, unaware that every careless step was bringing them closer to an irreversible destination. From that time forward, those closest to him noticed an even greater urgency in his ministry. He spent longer hours hearing confessions. He prayed deep into the night. He tirelessly sought out forgotten children in prisons, factories, and dangerous neighborhoods. The unseen conflict surrounding his life had become more intense than ever, and before long, it would reveal yet another extraordinary dimension, one that reached beyond dreams, beyond visions, and into the hidden secrets of the human soul, the prophecies of death, and the mystery of souls. Among the countless stories surrounding St. John Bosco, few inspired as much awe and quiet fear as the mysterious gifts that seemed to allow him to glimpse what remained hidden from ordinary human eyes. To the boys who lived under his care, he was far more than a teacher, a priest, or the founder of an orphanage. He became a father whose wisdom often seemed impossible to explain. Time after time, he appeared to know things no one had told him, to perceive dangers before they unfolded, and to recognize the invisible struggles taking place within the hearts of those around him. Many who encountered him left convinced that they had met a man whose life was guided by an extraordinary grace. Yet with those remarkable gifts came an immense burden. John Bosco never sought fame because of unusual experiences. In fact, he frequently discouraged curiosity about miracles, insisting that holiness was measured not by extraordinary phenomena, but by love, humility, and fidelity to God. Nevertheless, events continued to occur around him that even his closest companions struggled to explain. One of the most unsettling traditions preserved by members of the Salesian community concerned a series of private predictions that circulated quietly within the oratory. As a new year began, Bosco occasionally withdrew into prayer for long periods. During those moments, he sought guidance for the spiritual well-being of the hundreds of boys entrusted to his care. According to several witnesses, after these periods of intense prayer, he sometimes wrote a small list of names on folded pieces of paper. The papers were sealed. No one else was allowed to read them. They were kept private, sometimes entrusted to another priest with instructions that they should remain unopened unless circumstances required it. Only much later would people understand why. Bosco reportedly believed that God occasionally allowed him to foresee which members of his community would not survive the coming months. These were not predictions made to satisfy curiosity, nor were they announced publicly. Instead, they served a deeply pastoral purpose. If Bosco sensed that one of his boys might soon leave this world, he did everything possible to prepare that young soul spiritually. Without revealing what he knew, he drew closer to the child. He encouraged frequent confession. He spoke gently about the mercy of God. He invited the boy to receive Holy Communion with sincere devotion. He emphasized forgiveness, charity, and trust in Christ. To everyone else, these conversations appeared completely ordinary. Only after tragedy struck did their deeper significance become apparent. On several occasions, boys who had seemed healthy unexpectedly fell gravely ill. Others became victims of accidents that no one could have anticipated. Some contracted sudden infections, which were tragically common during 19th century Italy, where medical knowledge remained limited and epidemics spread rapidly through crowded neighborhoods. When these young people approached death, witnesses recalled something remarkable. Many faced their final moments with extraordinary peace. Rather than fear, their faces reflected serenity. Several reportedly smiled while holding a crucifix. Others quietly whispered prayers learned from Bosco himself. The priests who attended them often remarked that these boys appeared spiritually prepared in a way that seemed almost miraculous. Only afterward, when Bosco's sealed notes were opened, did people discover that their names had already been written there. The stories spread quietly throughout Turin. Some regarded them as coincidences. Others believed Bosco possessed a prophetic gift, granted by God for the salvation of souls. The priest himself rarely commented. Whenever questioned, he redirected attention away from predictions and toward the importance of living every day, as though it might be one's last. For him, preparation for death was never about fear. It was about remaining ready to meet God with a clear conscience. Yet if these mysterious prophecies unsettled those around him, another extraordinary ability inspired even greater astonishment. It became known simply as the gift of reading hearts. The confessional occupied a central place in Bosco's daily life. Hours passed as boys lined up patiently, waiting their turn to confess. Many carried burdens they had never shared with another human being. Some feared punishment. Others felt crushed by shame. Many struggled to express what weighed upon their conscience. Bosco welcomed each one with remarkable kindness. His gentle voice immediately calmed frightened children. Yet numerous testimonies describe moments that left penitents utterly speechless. As a boy began confessing, Bosco sometimes interrupted before the sentence was finished. He quietly mentioned another sin the child had intended to hide, then another, and another. His descriptions were astonishingly specific. He referred not only to actions, but sometimes to the exact circumstances surrounding them. Witnesses later claimed that Bosco occasionally identified the location where a particular event had occurred, the companions involved, or even the thoughts that had led the child toward temptation. The boys often burst into tears, not because they felt condemned, quite the opposite. They felt completely known, and despite being known so completely, they also felt deeply loved. Many later recalled that those confessions transformed their lives forever. One frequently repeated account tells of a young man who entered the confessional determined to conceal a serious sin. Fear and embarrassment prevented him from speaking honestly. Before he could continue, Bosco reportedly smiled gently. "My son," he is said to have whispered, "there is still something you have forgotten." The boy remained silent. Bosco then calmly described the hidden sin in careful detail. He even mentioned approximately when it had occurred. The young man broke down in tears. Years later, he testified that moment marked the beginning of his genuine conversion. Similar stories multiplied over the decades. Parents brought difficult children hoping Bosco might guide them. Priests consulted him regarding troubled souls. Workers sought spiritual advice. Young prisoners entrusted to his ministry often confessed that they had intended to deceive him, only to discover that deception seemed impossible in his presence. Many described the strange sensation that Bosco looked beyond appearances. His gaze seemed neither harsh nor suspicious. Instead, it reflected profound compassion. Those who met his eyes often felt as though every hidden wound, every regret, every secret fear had already been seen and forgiven. This remarkable sensitivity extended beyond the confessional. On several occasions, Bosco unexpectedly approached individuals simply to ask whether they wished to receive the sacraments. Sometimes the person accepted immediately. Only afterward did relatives reveal that the individual had secretly sensed death approaching, but had spoken to no one. In other cases, Bosco urged reconciliation between estranged family members without knowing the details of their conflict through ordinary means. Again and again, people found themselves astonished by the accuracy of his pastoral intuition. Even his fellow priests occasionally experienced moments they found difficult to explain. Several recalled preparing for Mass while carrying hidden anxieties or temptations they had shared with no one. Without any previous conversation, Bosco would offer brief words of encouragement that addressed precisely the struggle occupying their mind. He never embarrassed anyone publicly. He never displayed these gifts for admiration. Whenever extraordinary events occurred, he attributed everything to God's grace rather than personal ability. This humility became one of the defining characteristics of his life. Those closest to him noticed that the more unusual experiences surrounded him, the more determined he became to avoid personal recognition. He redirected praise toward prayer, toward charity, toward devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, whom he lovingly invoked under the title of Mary, Help of Christians. He insisted that the true miracle was not predicting the future or perceiving hidden sins. The greatest miracle, he taught, was the transformation of a human heart through repentance and divine mercy. Yet despite his reluctance to speak about supernatural gifts, stories continued spreading throughout Italy and eventually across the Catholic world. Pilgrims traveled long distances, hoping to receive his blessing. Parents entrusted their children to his school. Young men joined the growing Salesian congregation, inspired by his example. Many came seeking answers to life's deepest question. Others arrived burdened by guilt they had carried for years. Again and again, they departed convinced that they had encountered a priest who possessed an extraordinary ability to see beyond outward appearances and into the eternal destiny of the soul, a mysterious gift that would continue shaping countless lives as his mission expanded far beyond the streets of Turin.